both here and overseas, are a bit concerned about the plight of people under these austerity measures being suggested by the International Monetary Fund. There was a very simple question that was placed under the Freedom of Information Act, which I'm looking at the moment on whatdotheyknow.com. And the question is kind of twofold. One aspect related to what was it of tangible value that the bank surrenders when it creates money, and the other was if that money that is lent into circulation and it's carried interest for the past goodness knows how many centuries, where does the money come from to be able to pay the interest as well if it's not created?
Right, well, I'm not personally familiar with those particular answers, but not quite sure what you mean about the interest created.
Well, okay.
You mean if one person lends it to another, etc.?
No. Let's sort of wind this back to sort of make a very simple model of it, which I see reflects this. Maybe reflects. I don't know. You tell me. If I have a village of 100 people, and they each have a silver coin, and they use those silver coins to trade with one another, and then for some reason they become insecure, and so they take their silver coins into a bank who gives them a promissory note for them. Mm-hmm. Okay, so each of those promissory notes represents the silver coin. Mm-hmm. Once the bank then moves to lending promissory notes and issues more notes than actually exist in circulation, there's not enough silver coins to ever redeem.
Well, that's right. I mean, obviously the UK came off the gold standard in 1931, and the currency has been a fiduciary issue.
Right. Okay, and that's straight after the Great Depression, or during the biting time of the Great Depression.
Yes, so, I mean, they moved on and off the gold standard really several times during the first third of the century.
Sorry, can you just hang on 1 second?
Okay, yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of it, the UK government moved on and off the gold standard several times.
Okay, but
the century.
So we can confirm that there is a legacy that goes back quite a long way, where they moved off the gold standard. But the point is that once those promissory notes are issued, okay, if those promissory notes are issued, but then they're issued out as interest-carrying, interest-bearing, there won't be enough promissory notes in circulation within that village to enable that village to be free of debt. Would that be? I mean, that's just the sort of basic mathematics of it.
Yes, but as the economy of the village expands,
well, the debt is going to expand. For the economy to expand, it has to, because nobody will be able to afford to buy those items. And that's what we have today. Nobody can get a house without going and borrowing to buy a house, because there's not enough money in circulation for people not to be dependent upon the banks. And in fact, isn't that what we're being told?
No, but by a bank lending money, you're effectively using money several times. You're not actually creating money.
Well, if the interest required for that money isn't created, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen as people pay the principal and the interest back?
They don't spend money on other things.
That's right. In other words, the money goes back into the bank, who then use it under the fractional reserve system to multiply the amount of lending that goes out, and so the amount of borrowing goes up, and with it the amount of burdens of fees, interest and charges, until such a time where it's mathematically impossible, I think, for people to be able to repay their debts at the moment, isn't it?
Well, that's your words, not mine. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's what we appear to have, because I know that what we've got at the moment is vast swathes of the population, not just in these islands, but across the world, are expected to pay for when there is no money there, and when they can't pay, what happens? The equity, the real sweat equity, the things they have built and made, transfer into the hands of banks.
Well, that's right, yeah. But I mean, do you think that is unreasonable if the banks have lent them money based on say the equity of a property?
Well, I think if the money was, you see that the problem I have is this: the amount of credit that's in circulation, because it's about credit. Every conversation that I hear being had by economists and the International Monetary Fund relates to the importance of keeping the banks going so they can keep a line of credit going. But if all of that credit that they keep issuing carries interest, then the amount of indebtedness is multiplying up over time. Now, in certain times they can liberate the issuance of that credit, as we saw sort of 10 years ago, where everybody was being offered soft loans. And then that boosts the market. But then when the crisis hits and people, as they try and pay the principal and the interest back, depletes the amount in circulation until somebody, and generally it's the people who are either more gullible or not quite so avaricious or crafty in terms of business, they fall off the bottom of the ladder and they then become completely dependent upon the state. They become disenfranchised and even made bankrupt.
Yeah, I mean, going back a little way, of course, the first thing to say is that nobody's forced to take out credit.
No, they're not forced to take it out, but if they don't take credit out, it actually, I mean, I've had two businesses, and unless I have become very avaricious in terms of the way that I deal with people, unless I corner a market and make people dependent upon it, right? If I'm at all generous or soft or, forgiving of people, what happens is that I end up going down the tubes. I haven't done anything unpleasant to anybody, and we seem to have a situation now where the banks can't get the money back from the people because it's not there. Lots of people are unemployed. I mean, morally, when you look at it, it's really quite horrible, because poverty ultimately kills. And it's the problem we've got is how we resolve that, because if I look at the total indebtedness, where's the money going to come from to pay those debts? It can't, surely it can't, we can't keep borrowing off Peter to pay off Paul.
No, but if people continue to earn, obviously then they...
Well, where are they going to earn from?
Well, from jobs.
Well, yeah, now when I look at the jobs and the demographic, because the money that I think you've just issued some more money as credit into the city banks. Well, the city banks are working in collusion with government, and government is directing the direction of expenditure. And so when I look at the actual employment that's going on, rather than it being directed by what people want and need, they're meeting their requisite needs, it's going into building this ever more Orwellian inclined state.
Well, I'm sure people, if they have an opportunity to get the jobs they want, will do so, but if the alternative is no job currently, and the state are offering employment in particular institutions, which is where they feel it ought to be directed. Let
me give you an example. I've made lots of friends over this last year because I've been talking to a lot of people about this. One of the men I came across, same sort of age as me, he's in his early 50s. He'd been a college lecturer for 22 years, a good lecturer as well. But because of the cutbacks, that job closed. And he had to go on the dole. And then he was told, it was on the dole, you won't get your benefits unless you take a job that's offered to you. So now he's become a civil enforcement officer, going around putting car parking tickets onto people's cars. Now that's not stimulating the economy, that's reducing the capacity of people to actually function.
Well, yes, but you see, you've got to look at the alternatives. I mean, obviously you feel the present system isn't fair or whatever.
Well, saying that...
But what would be the choices for that particular person? I mean, if he has a family to support or whatever.
Right. Now, the cost of everything is governed by inflation and taxation.
Well, we're going to just go back to this example. Do you think it's reasonable that somebody who is offered a job and is unemployed do you think it's reasonable for everybody else to continue to pay this person unemployment benefit if he's unwilling to take the job he's offered? I mean,
well, let's have a look at this in terms of the resources. Okay, the actual physical resources that are in existence. Because if I compare the physical resources in existence, there is virtually no difference between the before and after of this particular crisis, which was, I understand, caused by the derivatives trading and all of the other shenanigans of Wall Street. Now, those physical resources are no different, but this has a huge influence on people's capacity to move about and to do what they should do. In fact, I've been suggesting recently that, you know, everybody having to have a job, rather than actually being able to work with the physical resources around them to meet their needs. So, for example, under the market economy, there's no gain, there's no commercial sense in collecting the apples, tons of apples, millions of tons of apples that are falling on the ground in this country right now and rotting. And yet those things are life-sustaining. So the commercial construct, as it currently is, ignores the real resources in favour of the commercial adherence, which ultimately seems to all serve the banking system, because all corporations are registered and all corporations have to pay tax in various forms, and that goes back in ultimately now through the national debt into the banking system.
Well, not always. It goes obviously into government expenditure as well.
Yeah. So we have government or banking, and we have government system, which now actually I have a telephone recording into the Ministry of Justice where they're saying, well, if people don't pay their council tax, we'll put them in prison. That's pretty scary. And I have the local authority here who put the rent up for people in council housing, these are the people at the bottom end of the pile, by 7%, and told them quite blatantly, if you don't agree with this and don't pay it, you've got a month to leave. So people are becoming homeless. So there's a problem here, because the actual dependency on the state seems to be generated by a failed banking system. Now, all of these things come down to contract at the end of the day. You know, people want me to do something, give my skills or resources over to them. That's fine, I've got no problem with dealing like that. But every time I do it, a great chunk of that revenue is peeled off in the form of taxes, levies, duties, and also the requirements to comply, insurances, and that adds a huge overhead. And it's all symptomatic. It's all symptomatic of the one very crucial aspect of this, and that is that if people borrow money from a bank, and I understand the mechanism under the fractional reserve system operates on the basis that it is the signature on the financial instrument which has the value which generates the money or the credit, and that the banks do this on the basis of risk, but the money is actually created into existence on that basis.
No, it's not created. Banks can lend a proportion of what they take in terms of deposits.
Yeah, so where does the money come from? That it's a proportion, isn't it? It's a multiplier.
No, it's not.
Okay, just explain that to me.
If I say I deposit £100 in your bank, and you're allowed to, you have to say retain 10% for cash purposes and lend on 90%. That £90 will then go into the general economy, and at some stage probably find its way into another bank, and they will be allowed to say lend out 90% of that. So then we're talking about £81, and they retain £9. That's where you get the multiplier effect. It's not money.
Where does the interest?
Just let me finish. It's not money. It's not money created. It's the same money being used several times.
Right. Okay. And where does the interest come from?
That is money paid by the borrowers that they.
Yeah. Where do the borrowers?
Hang on, just let me finish.
Sure.
That they would otherwise have spent on other goods.
So
if I hire a car, it's reasonable that I pay a fee to hire that car. So if I borrow money, it's reasonable that I should pay a fee, the interest, to borrow that money.
Well, now let's ask. Well, there's two questions relating to that. First of all, where does the monies required to pay the interest come from? Given that we've got a closed system here, I'm not talking about international. Even if I look at the whole planet, but let's just for the sake of it,
it comes from money that for instance, I borrowed money that I would have spent on other things. It comes from my bank account.
Right. So in other words, we're having to pay for something for the use of the credit.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Right, so where does the money come from that pays that interest? That's the bit I'm curious about. Where's that generated from?
Well, say an individual's paying interest on his mortgage, then